When assault weapons, which is an arbitrary definition, by the way, assault weapons, when assault weapons are outlawed, only outlaws will have assault weapons. Personally, I don't support the worst people having the best weapons. I support the right of every person in this country to protect themselves on an even field. So when you enact your Second Amendment destroying, it's done on a moral basis. It's done on a basis where you're saying we're seeing gun violence and we want to prevent it. We want to get rid of these things. We want to prevent pain and suffering. This is, virtuistic. This is moral, a moral position to have. But it's about the method. Okay? Look at the stats for gun-free zones. When you take the guns away from law-abiding citizens, they don't have the same level of protection they would against the not-so-savory career criminals that are out there. They have black market firepower, and they're going up against your more restrictive laws regarding the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. I say that, hell, the bump stock ban should go and that we should unrestrict gun sales and take an approach of gun safety, because we know that mental health is the key factor in mass shootings. You don't pick up a gun and kill people if you're mentally well. If you're insane, yes, you might go ahead and grab a gun. That means we need to focus on mental health, and we must not, allow gun control laws to take hold, because when people lose their access to guns, yes, more people will die, more innocent people will die. Criminals will not be following the law. They will not be following all the provisions of your background check law. Okay? I used to think that background checks were a pretty good idea, but it's an artificial limitation on your right to bear arms. I'm sure that we can find a compromise, but for now I do err on the side of unrestricted gun rights in this country. I think that's the more virtuous position to hold, but again, I could be wrong and my opinion may change. But assault weapons is arbitrary, and in terms of automatic weapons, considering how much they can be modified, I was going to say modded, but modified, same thing. You can change a semi-automatic to an automatic. You can change a non-automatic weapon to a semi-automatic. Okay? And it's really, really hard to regulate these things, especially with the advent of 3D printers and 3D printed guns. Okay? And 3D printed ammunition and bullets. Okay? It's a very hard thing. So you want to err on the side of liberty, so that American citizens that have a constitutional right to personal protection through a firearm are allowed to protect themselves without any arbitrary blocks or limitations that are not required by career criminals that are going to buy their weapons on the black market. They're going to buy them in a hotel room somewhere, and they're going to completely go above or under the table from your gun legislation. Okay, it's only going to hurt the law-abiding citizens and their freedom when you put those things in. So, something we should be very careful about, and take a look at the countries that disarmed their citizens over time, or all at once, and tell me how authoritarian versus libertarian those countries are, and think about the values on which this country was founded. We are not other countries. We are not Australia. We are not a European country, an African country, an Asian country. We are the United States of America. And so we have our own ethos on how these things should be applied. And I say that I think President Trump says this, and this is one way of framing it: the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Okay? If you had more guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens, yes, mass shootings would probably, and by the way, the gun crime rate is lower than it was in the 80s and 90s. In fact, it may be at all-time lows. Check the stats, check the numbers. Don't take my word for it. But, you see it in the news, you catch it in the media, and of course, when a school shooting occurs or there's a major shooting where a lot of innocent people are hurt, I know it does bring out, the heartstrings, and it brings out a lot of emotion and anger and fear that we are allowing the world to go to hell, to turn into clown world, as it were. But the reality is that a lot of these murderers would have been stopped if people were better armed to protect themselves. It really is as simple as that. Okay, we have to focus on training people to aim and to manage guns safely, and that may include children. Okay, that's the parents' discretion. If we're going to have, this is a totally separate argument, but let's just put it this way. If we're going to have kids under the age of 10 or under the age of 11 learning about sex in school, they can afford to learn about gun safety, notably women who have a harder time due to their physical attributes, in most cases, than men, protecting themselves, okay? Especially those that work in dangerous environments, okay? In dangerous occupations. Okay, some people, men and women, and the trans community, they, in certain areas of the country and in certain occupations, they may require high-end personal protection in the form of a gun more than you actually believe. Okay? You don't bring a knife to a gunfight. So just to close that topic for today, people wanting to vote in local or state politicians and policies that promote common sense being completely arbitrary, gun laws, please do. That is democracy in action. See how restrictive gun laws work for your community. But do not try to force your approach on others. So I do not believe that guns should be too regulated, if regulated at all, on a federal level. It may be a state level that's more where it's going to come down to a more liberty-focused answer and outcome. Because certain states, guns are like commonplace and they're used differently. In Vermont, you're using a gun more often to hunt or to do things on the farm. If you have a farm, there's all these different applications. These are tools. Guns are tools as well as protection and as weapons. So the gun laws in Vermont, for example, a more rural area, may need to be different than those in a city, okay, given population density and just the nature of why the person needs guns in the first place. I support their right to have a gun, but if people use democracy and they choose to have different kind of gun rights in their state, as long as it doesn't interfere with the Constitution, go ahead, see how it works, A/B test. And hopefully you don't put in a policy that doesn't work and you have too much trouble removing it. People droning like old crones about thoughts and prayers not being enough as a response to gun violence should glance at the number of areas with stricter gun laws. The numbers show that when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns, and when laws are tougher, only the toughest people break them. Okay. I talked a lot about that. And I do have a tweet in 2019, my position on guns, where I talk a little bit more about that subject. It's right up there with climate change and the modern religion that is global warming in terms of people's emotional response, because nobody wants to see people shot up. It seems so preventable, but again, the opposite of what you believe. If you believe that taking away all the guns is going to stop gun violence, well, you might need to apply some casual fatalism because it'll just be disarming people from protecting themselves.